The rain pelted against the windows like forgotten promises, each drop a memory Daniel Morgan had spent 3 years trying to wash away. He stood in his kitchen, 42 years old with grief lines etched deeper than his smile lines would ever be again, staring at the single plate in the sink. One plate, one fork, one glass. The mathematically perfect equation of solitude. Asterisk before we continue this journey, if you're enjoying this story of unexpected second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch your heart and soul. Your support means everything. Asterisk. 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days since cancer took Sarah. 3 years of existing rather than living. Daniel had constructed walls around his heart as meticulously as he had renovated the old Victorian house they'd bought together, the one that now echoed with only his footsteps. "That's enough," he muttered, dumping the cold remnants of his coffee down the drain. The autumn wind howled outside, matching the emptiness within him. He had lesson plans to review. 27 high school history students expected Mr. Morgan to teach them about ancient civilizations tomorrow, not about how grief becomes a roommate that never leaves. The knock came at 9:37 p.m. 3 sharp raps that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Daniel froze, coffee mug suspended mid-rinse. Nobody visited him. His sister called every Sunday but lived 3 states away. His colleagues respected his preference for solitude. The neighborhood kids knew to avoid the property of the sad teacher man. The knocking came again, more urgent this time. Daniel dried his hands on a dish towel, irritation rising as he moved through the dimly lit hallway. The porch light had burned out weeks ago, and he hadn't bothered to replace it. What was the point of illuminating emptiness? He opened the door to rain, wind, and wide hazel eyes that punched through his carefully constructed numbness. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breathless, rain plastering dark curls against her face. "My car broke down, and my phone's dead. Could I possibly use your phone to call for help?" She stood beneath the broken porch light, a stranger in a drenched blue coat, clutching a laptop bag protectively against her chest. Something about her, perhaps the apologetic smile or the way she shivered slightly, made Daniel step aside rather than point her toward the neighbor's house, where lights still blazed at this hour. "Thank you," she said, stepping into his foyer, bringing with her the scent of rain and something floral that seemed jarringly out of place in his sterile home. "I'm Eliza. Eliza Reed." "Daniel Morgan," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. He gestured toward the kitchen. "Phone's in there." She followed him, and he noticed how her eyes took in the barren walls where photographs had once hung, the stack of unread mail on the counter, the single chair pulled up to the kitchen table. "Beautiful home," she said kindly, despite its obvious neglect. Daniel handed her the cordless phone, watching as she dialed, noting the absence of a ring on her finger, then immediately chastising himself for noticing such a thing. "Yes, I need roadside assistance," she spoke into the phone. "I'm at." She looked at Daniel questioningly. 1742 Oakwood Lane, he supplied. As she continued her conversation, Daniel found himself studying her. She was perhaps mid-30s, with laugh lines around her eyes that suggested she smiled often. Her sodden coat couldn't hide her slender frame, and despite her bedraggled appearance, she carried herself with a quiet dignity. "4 hours?" she exclaimed suddenly. "Are you sure there's nothing sooner?" "I see." She sighed, thanked the person on the other end, and handed the phone back to Daniel. "Apparently there's been a pile-up on the highway. All the tow trucks are tied up until after midnight." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Social niceties had become foreign territory. "You can wait here," he offered stiffly. "I can drive you somewhere if you need." "Oh no, I've imposed enough," she said, though relief flashed across her face. "If I could just wait until they come, maybe make one more call to let my brother know I'll be late." Daniel nodded, retreating to the living room to give her privacy. Through the doorway, he heard snippets, "Staying with a kind stranger, yes, I'll be careful, no, Jake, I don't need you to drive out in this weather. Kind stranger. The word sat uncomfortably on his shoulders. He hadn't been kind in years, he'd merely been polite. Kindness required an emotional investment he no longer had the currency for. When she joined him in the living room, she was attempting to wring water from her hair. "Let me get you a towel," he said abruptly, disappearing upstairs. In his bathroom, Daniel caught his reflection in the mirror, unkempt beard, hollow eyes, the uniform of a man who had stopped caring. He grabbed a clean towel from the linen closet, hesitated, then took one of Sarah's old robes that he still couldn't bring himself to donate. "Here," he said, returning to find Eliza examining the single photograph he hadn't packed away, his high school history club standing before the Lincoln Memorial. "You can change in the bathroom down the hall if you want. That's an old robe. Might be more comfortable than wet clothes." Their fingers brushed as she accepted his offerings, and Daniel felt an electric jolt of something he immediately tried to suppress. Human contact. He'd forgotten its simple power. "Thank you. That's incredibly kind." When she emerged minutes later, wrapped in Sarah's blue robe, her wet clothes bundled in her arms, Daniel felt a stab of something between betrayal and longing. The robe that had once held his wife now held a stranger. "I can make tea," he offered, needing to occupy his hands, to distract from the confusion swirling inside him. "That would be lovely." As the kettle boiled, silence stretched between them. Not the comfortable silence of old friends, but the awkward pause of two strangers thrust together by circumstance. "You're a teacher?" she asked finally, nodding toward a stack of history books on the counter. "High school history," he confirmed, placing a mug before her. "You?" "Architectural preservation consultant," she replied, warming her hands around the mug. "I was headed to evaluate the old courthouse downtown. They're considering renovation." Daniel felt a flicker of interest despite himself. "The Sanders Courthouse? It's one of the few Gothic Revival buildings left in the state." Her eyes lit up. "You know architecture?" "My wife was an architect," he said, the words leaving his mouth before he could filter them. "Wife. Not ex-wife. Not late wife. Just wife," as if Sarah might walk through the door any moment. Understanding dawned in Eliza's eyes. She repeated softly. Daniel busied himself with his tea, unwilling to elaborate. But something about the quiet acceptance in Eliza's gaze made the walls around his grief tremble slightly. 3 years ago, he found himself saying. "Cancer." Eliza didn't offer platitudes or pity, just nodded. "My husband, 5 years ago. Car accident." For simple words that created a bridge between them, survivors of life's cruelest lottery. "Does it get easier?" The question escaped him, raw and vulnerable. "Not easier," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Different. The grief changes shape. Some days it's a boulder, others just a stone in your pocket. But always there." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something shifted imperceptibly as two people who had forgotten how to connect remembered, for just a moment, what it felt like to be understood. Daniel cleared his throat. "More tea?" The conversation drifted to safer topics, the history of the town, her current project, his students' amusing misconceptions about ancient Rome. For the first time in years, Daniel found himself engaging in a conversation that didn't feel like a performance of normalcy. When her phone beeped to life after charging, Eliza checked the time. "Still 2 hours before they can get here." "We could watch something," Daniel suggested, surprising himself. "Or I could drive you somewhere if you'd prefer not to wait." "A movie sounds nice, actually," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. "If you don't mind the company." They settled on the couch with a respectable distance between them, watching an old black and white film that neither paid full attention to. Daniel was too aware of another person breathing in his space, of the subtle floral scent that had replaced the emptiness, of the way light and shadow played across Eliza's profile. Halfway through the film, she spoke without looking at him. The hardest part isn't the big days, anniversaries, birthdays. It's the ordinary moments when you turn to share something and remember they're not there. Daniel's throat tightened. Finding something at the store you know they'd love, he added. And having nowhere to put that thought. Exactly. She turned to him then, and in her eyes, he saw the same haunted recognition that greeted him in the mirror each morning. I never planned to. He began, then stopped, uncertain what he was trying to confess. Neither did I, she replied, understanding the unfinished thought. But here we are. The tow truck arrived just before midnight. Daniel watched from the porch as Eliza, back in her now dry clothes, spoke with the mechanic. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and glistening under streetlights. Thank you for your kindness, she said, returning to hand him Sarah's folded robe. It meant more than you know. Daniel accepted it, their fingers brushing again. This time, he didn't pull away quite so quickly. Will you be in town long? For the courthouse project? About 3 weeks, she replied, something hopeful flickering across her face. The courthouse has an interesting history, he said carefully. If you'd like to hear it sometime. Eliza smiled, pulling a business card from her bag and writing something on the back. My personal number, she explained, pressing it into his palm. I'd like that very much. As her taillights disappeared down the street, Daniel stood on the porch, card in hand, heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm, not quite hope, not quite fear, but something alive. Something he thought had died with Sarah. He hadn't planned for this. Hadn't planned for a storm, a broken-down car, a woman in a blue coat with understanding in her eyes. Hadn't planned to feel anything beyond the comfortable numbness of routine. Daniel Morgan hadn't planned to love again. But as he closed the door to his empty house that suddenly felt different, haunted not just by what he'd lost but by what might be possible, he realized some of the best things in life arrive unplanned, with nothing more than a knock on the door. Asterisk if this story of unexpected second chances touched your heart, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the depth of human connection and resilience. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we least expect them. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story, asterisk.